Howdy, and once again, welcome to Escaping Dystopia. My name is Wall. Today is August 6th, 2019. This is episode 82. White Nationalist Domestic Terrorism Surfaces. As many of you know, or might not know about the show, basically the first time I kind of go through this, I just kind of try and read through the straight news a little bit, and then talk a little bit later about some of the stuff that hasn't been going. One of the themes that we cover here a lot is this notion I call Spaceship Earth. It's a concept of building a moral framework to understand how to deal with the reality that we live in. Kind of a fun one. For this month, our Spaceship Earth reminder is that the last month that we just experienced, July 2019, was the hottest month measured in human history. There are forest fires raging largely across most of the Arctic. A lot of Siberia is burning. We'll discuss a little bit about that later because the president of Russia asked for some help from the president of the United States for those. Alaska is experiencing unprecedented wildfires. They hit 90 degrees for the first time ever. This is, again, thermostat's getting hotter. This is very clear. We need to act soon. There are other more pressing concerns, it turns out. This latest, so it's been basically a little over a month since I did my last show. I think until we really start ramping up into hardcore election cycle season, I'll probably try and do one a month. Done with softball for a little bit, so I have some of the weekends open, but I do also now officially have a terrible twosome toddler. This, of course, being the second year of life when the 1-year-old can do and move things but can't communicate effectively. So, extra time for shows limited. So, this last weekend, my family and I went camping, and so we were out a little bit out of coverage of things, and while we're away, there were two major mass shootings. One of which I'll probably talk a little bit more in detail. These mass shootings killed over 20 people in El Paso, another 8 in Dayton, Ohio, including another shooting the week before in California. Two of these are being investigated as domestic terrorist incidents. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means later. Some of the things we know that weren't the cause of this, or at least aren't the cause of all of this, well, we'll talk about this on the second run through. These things happened this last week. The nation is kind of in shock right now, as are a lot of people. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is later. The president also was finally called out by a lot of major media sources for his racist Twitter rants this last week, including some notions about go back where you came from, to some minority congresswomen who have been nationalized and been citizens longer here in the United States than the president's own third wife. Again, only the facts on this first run through. So they finally started to call them racist, and that word has been a major discussion in political circles, even more so in the last couple weeks. It's fairly clear that a lot of people are using the term differently. We'll talk about that again on the second run through. We'll talk about a little bit more about the gun debate, which is raging right now when we go through North Korea Denuclearization update. So the North Koreans have fired a number of projectiles, various missiles into the ocean. The consistent response from our president has been to dismiss it out of hand. Not as much for people in the region. We'll talk a little bit more about that going around. The China trade war update. So there is no deal. This war is continuing to accelerate. The United States threatened another 10% tariffs on most domestic goods. This is where we're going to start hitting toys and iPhones and other made in China things. Most of the stuff that you actually use. This is the one that will hit Walmart. They have responded with currency manipulation, or I should say they've let their currency slide, which we've now officially accused them of currency manipulation. As of yesterday, Secretary Mnuchin did that. Our Federal Reserve is also cutting our interest rates in response to the trade war to keep our economy strong. So we'll talk more about that coming up. Yield curve has inverted. This is one of those signs that a recession is likely coming soon. Basically what this means is a long-term yield, how much you get paid for owning a bond, dips less than what a short-term yield would provide. Usually what this means is that people are seeing in between now and when that 10-year note would mature, there's most likely to be some sort of disruption, i.e. downward direction. So basically the thinking is it's going to be much safer to have short-term investments. The Iran update, we'll talk about a little bit more about that, but the facts here are they have been seizing ships and continually kind of doing some instigatory moves. This came all the way, including some drones that have been shot down. There was a bit of question about where that happened. The President of the United States then threw a pretty serious military bluff at them, which they kind of went, okay, whatever, and then he called off it 10 minutes before it happened. We'll go a little bit over the Democratic candidate rundown later. Man, there's a ton of stuff. It's been like a month. But there's basically about 5 real candidates. I'll tell you who those are on the second run through. 4th of July celebration. Because we didn't cover it before, the President of the United States threw himself a military parade and celebration for the 4th of July. There were, in fact, tanks that they brought in. They weren't just driving through. They had them parked. But, yes, he got his tanks. The border situation, we'll talk more about that. The Democrats in Congress threw a lot of money and did not go with the harsher bill. As the news of the border situation came out, there was a calculation, shall we say, that it would be better to simply move along and do their job than try and fight for something that was not going to work very well. Unfortunately, well, can't really say that yet. Second run through. We'll try on that. It was also announced that there was a U.S. resident who was held for over 3 weeks by Border Patrol despite him showing documents and then claiming they were false. This was based on a previous record of him crossing over to visit his family, extended family in Mexico, where there was some confusion about what name was used or given. So they kept him for 23 days. He lost 26 pounds. It's also announced that since the court order last year, they've taken nearly 1,000 children away from their parents. Again, using the same excuse that because of the violations of immigration, therefore the parents are criminals, therefore they shouldn't have children with them, even if they do. There's been a big thing, and I guess I could do a whole thing on this, about the Trump administration fighting really all the subpoenas that are coming from the Democratic House as they try to investigate all of these things. There was a clear decision from the the investigative general, like the Office of Ethics, that they should basically fire Kellyanne for willfully violating the Hatch Act. This is a law that put into place that the president advisors and assistants really aren't supposed to be actively politically campaigning when they're ostensibly working on behalf of the nation. Since the president that we have now has made it very, very clear that he is not a big fan of a lot of this country. They've also ignored that and allowed them to use people who are being paid with taxpayer dollars to do just naked politicized politicking. This is against the rule, and unfortunately the person who enforces the laws of this country is the President of the United States. Speaking of which, he also had a friend, a guy by the name of Epstein. This scandal keeps getting buried by other scandals, some of which I think are a little bit of manipulative on the part of the president and how he has learned to play the press. He's admitted this, so I think this is actually very clear that he uses the power of his tweets to change the news cycle. But the president and Mr. Epstein were actually quite a bit closer than has been admitted to. And again, the Secretary of Labor of the United States had to step down because of this situation. We'll see if anything more comes out of this, and there's a little bit of speculation on that too that I'll talk about later. We might be heading towards some of the deep, dirty underbelly of the United States, which we're already there with that. The Mueller testimony, well, that quickly faded, did it not? He came out, basically said the same thing that was in his report, which was that the Trump campaign accepted a lot of Russian help, and that they couldn't find a criminal element to that, and therefore the obstruction is not something that the attorney general... Anyway, basically what he did was just say what's in the report, and he just reset it, and he was very, unfortunately, for a lot of folks who wanted him to be a little clearer about what he was saying, he wasn't. And I think it did a bit of a disservice to the country in that regard. Might talk about that later. And the other big one, too, is the Director of National Intelligence steps down. Dan Coates, he was one of the last adults in the room, as they say. Yeah, he decided he couldn't do it anymore. And so he's gone. And that's the facts as they were. I'm still kind of working on this whole format, you know? I don't get a lot of feedback, and I'm just doing it for fun. So, going back up to the top, and we have some fun talking about this. I guess, how long are we into this? A few minutes? Probably need to start practicing that so I can go through the quick one and then do it in like news voice and then have fun later, right? Then be like, hey, just show up 5 minutes later. Give myself 5 minutes to do the real news, maybe. And then, or at least the unbiased version. That's why I'm wearing the nice shirt, right? So, this white nationalist shooting, domestic terrorism, this is a real thing now. This is, again, from the beginning of this program. This is why I started this show. This escaping dystopia idea was that, look, where we're headed with this kind of rhetoric at the helm is a bad, bad place. And we've seen these steps incrementally coming along over now. And now you saw it just explicitly laid out in this manifesto. There is an invasion of this country from Mexicans. They will take over our political situation and replace us. This is so straight out of white nationalist rhetoric. It's right there. The motivation here is so crystal clear and the act so disgustingly violent and targeted. There's even news coming out now that he would let people who were not Hispanic leave, and was being that targeted with who he wanted to kill. And again, this is part of a larger culture, and this is what is so dangerous about this situation, because this stuff is always out here. But when you start to give that green light to go with it, that green light to say, you know, these people are invading us, and we don't know how to stop them, and yeah, shoot them. And there's video of that too, where you have the president kind of laughing off this notion that someone would shoot people at the border. The president gave a little speech, and apparently he's going to go visit some of these towns in the next few days, which nobody wants him to do. And this situation is where, again, this happened with the bomber that they caught before, who was recently sentenced to 20 years in prison for what he did targeting the president's enemies. He was one of those people going to these rallies, hearing what the president wanted, and taking it that next step. That's where this comes from. That's what gives them the green light. That's why when people are talking about this and giving some of this blame for this to the president and his rhetoric, because it's one thing to have those voices in your head, it's quite another to have the President of the United States echoing those sentiments, and one who really, really likes to play with vague innuendo. And you know what I'm thinking. You know what I'm saying. You hear me. I'm thinking what you are. That kind of sales pitch that is so inherent to his style of speaking now. When you start to do that around these kind of things, it is inevitable that this kind of stuff will happen. Inevitable. And there's warnings everywhere. And they come out and blame the same usual suspects. Mental illness, which everyone deals with. And the mental illness and violence connection is, again, a stigmatism that doesn't exist there. It's very clear that some of these, at least one of these shooters had a history of obviously some violent mental disturbance. But to dismiss all of these as mental illness is such a huge mistake. We don't do that with everyone who murders someone. Well, they murdered them, therefore they were crazy, so, can't look in the mirror because that person says what I say and thinks what I think. This manifesto so mirrored what has become mainstream right-wing ideology that the danger here that this spreads is so clear. This is why I started doing this show, because I saw this. Because you can't keep doing that and not have something happen. I did a post about this and talking about being targeted. Because I don't talk about this a whole lot because this has never been... it's never been a thing that I've thought of as part of who I am, right? My family, my wife, her family is from Mexico. The people that this person, this terrorist, was targeting is me and my family. What he would call a mixed race situation. He called for in this manifesto, he echoed Steve Bannon, who was the president's advisor on separating everyone into, your own little race, and then you can have your own race and religion in your part, and you can have yours over here, and this economic nationalism that the president advisor is known for. This is exactly what was in that manifesto. And the violence from this attack was meant to achieve that purpose. And when the president comes out and these Republicans and they come out and they're, oh, mental illness and video games and oh, why aren't they praying in schools? If you don't pray to this God, he will slaughter you. Did you not read the Bible? So, and then and blaming the internet and media companies, the complete and utter lack of self-awareness here, because I completely agree that the internet is a radicalizing tool for those who get into that mindset, for those who follow that path. And it's very easy to get there. And they've shown now, too, that part of the danger to the way the internet works now, the smart AI internet, the algorithmically programmed one, the one that's watching your every move and trying to get you to stick around wherever you are, the one that says, oh, you like conspiracy videos? Well, guess what? People who like conspiracy videos also like these conspiracy videos. And they also like these websites. And once you start to get in now, it gets bad. And I do think there needs to be regulation. And I do think there needs to be legislation. I do not think that this is the right person to drive this in any way, shape, or form. But this week has definitely put a lot of people on a different plane for this. And this brings us, as we move on a little bit, to Trump's racist rants. This Twitter rants about sending people back and going home and these shitholes and these fix-it. It's so obvious, the racist element to here. You don't even have to go that deep. And then you go back, and when you do, and you see that there's these 2015 tweets about then he was blaming Baltimore on Obama. Because, of course, Obama's black. Now, this is what's funny about this, because the association here is so obviously clear, and even by the Republican definition of racism, in which it has... And see, this is what's funny, because in the Republican definition of racism, you have to say to somebody's skin color, and you have to admit that's why you're doing something. You have to do both those things. Well, he is black, and therefore, because of that, and you can't... And it's okay and not racism if you don't do that, and it's just kind of implied. And this kind of... Well, that's not racism. He didn't say that they were black people. It's this kind of plain dumb troll racism, troll ideology stuff that has been so detrimental to useful public discourse. I've had the opportunity to join this group with a number of people who are supposed to be a representative of the intelligent, educated class in our country. And I gotta say, this is the ideology of right wing. It's not, there's not a top end, right? Like Ben Shapiro and Trump and Bannon, that's pretty much it. I mean, there's not something like, oh, surely there's a level where these people actually talk about science and facts as if they're real, and no, there's not. And for those, and this is actually, there's one of the things that has come of this, there's a Trump's not racist challenge. If you run into somebody who insists that Trump's not racist, you can give them a challenge to prove it, and that's simply to, at their place of work, treat someone of minority status the way Trump has been speaking to congressmen. To tell them to go home, go back to their country, fix their shithole place, then maybe they can come back. To speak to them the way Trump speaks to and see what happens. And see if, when you get fired, if it's in fact the racism that caused it. So there's a Trump's not racist challenge. Anybody who thinks Trump's not racist, feel free to say what he says to minority congresswomen, the people he works with, to the people that you work with, and see how it goes. Put it on camera. Even better. Yeah, and as I mentioned, one of the people he told to go back where they came from has been an American citizen longer than his wife. Oh, also came out this last week that Ronald Reagan was pretty racist, too. A phone call that Richard Nixon recorded from I believe he was the then governor of California, spoke about how all these leaders of African nations were essentially monkeys and could barely wear shoes. And that's Ronald Reagan. There was a lot of discussion, and this is one of the things why Republicans are always like, oh, you guys are always saying... Sorry, voice is a little rough. Always saying Republicans are racist. And then you have this recording comes out. Reagan talking to Nixon, who, of course, the other Nixon tapes revealed a lot of Nixon's racism. And then you see that Reagan's was just as deep. So... the gun debate. We're barely having this. It looks like we might get something on some red flags, which the way that the Republicans will approach this is most likely write something that they absolutely know will not pass the courts and put something in as the poison pill kind of thing. So I would not expect any national legislation to come from this. It won't happen while Republicans still have power, not in any good way. There's no question, I don't think, for most people's mind, that we need these universal background checks. I think most people now want to get rid of the assault weapons. And if you're going to play dumb and act like nobody knows what an assault weapon is, go do so someplace else. Another country, perhaps. North Korea... So, I was spending some time on the Twitter following some stuff around the G20 time, and there was a couple kind of quick things that North Korea was making a lot of noise that what had been promised to them, right, when Trump said, oh yeah, we can denuclearize, you'll denuclearize, everybody will be happy, you can be welcome back to the world, and we're all good. Well, that verbal deal has not proved any fruit for the North Korean. And so it came out then at the G20 that, unless they got some serious stuff happen, nukes were going to start, being tested again near the end of the year. So Trump immediately flies to North Korea, gives him this huge propaganda victory by walking over there, and then comes back, thinks that he's, placated him enough. And now, of course, we've seen all these missile tests, which, of course, he's not supposed to be doing whatsoever. So I would say, by the end of the year, because he's not going to actually do anything, and Pompeo and Bolton aren't going to allow any progress to be made, we're probably going to see another nuclear test from North Korea near the end of the year, in which he will then probably dismiss it again. And I'll give you a quick tangent on that, and you have to understand why this is a dire straits, why I'm spending time yelling at my thing in the basement. So I want people to know this. There's been some questions about the security clearances, right? And how Ivanka and Jared got their security clearances. And it came out through various reporting that Trump just overrode the people who said no. When the National Intelligence Service comes back and says, no, these people were probably compromised, I don't think it would be good to give them access to this information. they got access anyway because the president overrode that decision. Because the president of the United States is the ultimate authority on who has access to that information. So, and they had a report that came out, and this was in a news story. I don't know if I shared it. I read a lot of stuff that I don't share, which... they came back, and the Inspector General said, yes, we'd love to look into how these security clearances got done, and we will be more than happy to answer your questions, Congress. All we need is a note from the president that says that he would like us to. And this is one of the things that why you don't have internal checks on the executive power of the president is because he's the president. And that's what the election is supposed to do. And so when you put somebody who is apparently compromised in that position, there's no real internal checks and balances to stop them. The one that we have, right, in the Constitution itself is through impeachment and censure and basically what Congress can do. But we know how the votes work on that. And we know that Mitch McConnell will not do it. And a lot of people have given Pelosi a bunch of crap and other Democrats for not immediately doing this. But again, the only way to fix this is really through elections. When you have the situation we have now where the partisanship is so high that it does not matter. He can literally go on racist rants. You can literally have white supremacist terrorist attacks. And Republicans will not break from it. We are in a different world than when Nixon was in the office. The president has that ability. The president can say this. He can classify and classify anything. He can shoot nuclear weapons at people. Or not. We also pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that we had with the Russias. I wanted to say the Soviet Union, but there's not one anymore. With Russia. So we can start developing new nuclear weapons. Fun. And we get to test those too. We start doing it. China starts doing it. The trade war update. Well, let's look at that. Let's move to the China trade war. So, basically, China was like, we can't even, you say this, then you do that, then you say this. You know what? Pretty sure that's what China did. Probably not like that. I'm sure somewhere along the way there was a mention of we're a 6,000-year-old culture. We can wait a few years while you guys are crazy. And Trump is trying to run this like the way he does all of his business deals, which is just bluster and bluff and try and get something for nothing. And they've never been party to that because they don't see this as an imbalance where it's like Trump thinks he can do, right? Because he's the big owner of Trump Tower. You know, you're just a plumber. So, sue me. I'm not going to pay you. I don't like your price now. You did the work, but I don't like it. And that's the way he's always tried to run his business. And that's the way he's trying to run the country in international diplomacy. And it's not working at all. It's just not working. So China's letting their currency slide. We're cutting interest rates. We're going to be now having tariffs on all Chinese goods coming over. Like I said, it's probably going to start hitting Walmart and a lot of electronic stuff in the next couple months. And I think this has been made clear that they're not going to go back to the negotiating table with this guy. They're going to wait. And even if he wins again, I don't know that they would really be all that interested, because I don't think he's capable of understanding what a good and fair deal is. And he didn't understand that was why we're doing the TPP. Because the way that you move a big immovable object is you don't. You move the things around it. And then it will appear that it has moved. Anyway. Yield curves inverting, like I was saying. So this is basically, you have a certain percentage when you buy a bond that you get paid out, and how much it matures, what it pays, the yield. how much it pays out. And we have this inversion where the 3-month yield is higher than the 10-year yield, and that's what they call kind of the yield curve. You look at the spread between the two. Basically, when this inverts, that means that you can get a better rate of return on a short-term bond than you can on a long-term bond, which means that people are a little sketchy about what the future means. In the past, this has been an indicator that we are headed towards a contraction, a recession economically. We'll see how that works nowadays, because every time that we have these recessions and we look at these macroeconomic factors and these things that do this kind of stuff, we adjust. And so we have a Fed that's aware, and everybody knows that that's the case. So the markets have a kind of sentient ability, because they're all run by humans, ultimately. Although now, of course, we've got our flash crash AIs running things. So when things get real sketchy, we'll see. I'm guessing near the end of the next earnings, so it'll be near the end of this quarter, where we'll see how much this trade war is really going to affect next stuff, because now people are going to have to really factor in the idea that it's not going to be resolved in the next year. And everybody who has these supply lines that go through or around or involve China is going to see their costs go up. Now, so they'll be able to use the tax break, I guess, to cover it, since the tax break's about big. Anyway, Iran. So, Iran is basically grabbing a couple ships. I think they just grabbed another ship last couple days. They're shooting drones, basically driving up the price of oil in response to us pulling out of the deal. This is such an absurd thing, because I think if someone could actually get the president to actually read what the deal was that he destroyed, he would like it. And he'd be more than happy to sign it, because that window beyond which they could possibly maybe start up a nuclear program would be beyond his second term, if there was one. But I don't think he ever understood that. And again, the reason why he did this was the ego from the correspondence dinner. And so that's why he had to destroy what were, in fact, probably some of Obama's best accomplishments, including the Iran nuclear deal. Bringing these 6 countries together to solve this problem was a big deal, and that's why he had to blow it up. Now he wants it back again. It's just dope. Democratic candidate rundown. Yeah, there's basically 5 candidates: Warren, Biden, Bernie, Pete, and maybe Harris. We'll see. I think it's going to come down to 2 or 3. I'm wondering what the third one's going to be. I think a lot of people like their folks. I actually probably like a couple other people a little barrel. I like the Swalwell. He was fun. He's out. Gravel is out. Did you know that my Gravel was running again? There'll be a few more dropping off. Again, we're still many, many months away. You can look up when your primary is, but it's probably next year. So, debates are fun on the other side, but people aren't going to get voting on that for a while, so just keep your powder dry there. Like I said, the President of the United States made a mockery of the 4th of July, making it about him, throwing this whole thing up, giving his speech. And a lot of these times when he does the teleprompter stuff, he avoids the racist rants. When he doesn't have the teleprompter, it's kind of harder for him, and especially if his crowd wants it, and he knows they do. So, the border situation. This has been really, really, really rough to watch, because you have this situation that is continually... it's not the best situation in the best of times, right? And then we have economic strife in a lot of Central American countries. We're not even seeing the waves of Venezuelan refugees yet. In fact, I think we announced total sanctions on Venezuela this week. So there's still the potential for millions of more refugees to be flowing through the country. I saw a chart last year. The U.S. took in less refugees than Canada, and the people up north, that country that has a smaller population than California. They took in more refugees last year than we did. I personally, because of my experience with people who live here and have learned to live here and learned to get along with this country, I find this only weakens us. It only weakens our nation's spirit, our soul, our perspective. The more people you can bring in, the more voices you can hear, the more accurate your understanding can be. And as we continually draw away, there are news stories that they're kicking out military recruits who have foreign ties, despite a lot of these people being recruited because they have foreign ties and experience in the first place. Because when you have that and you come together and bring it, you have a better understanding of the world that we live in, this spaceship Earth. That's what makes, to me, the U.S. so amazing. That is, to me, the exceptional part, that we are accepting of all of this, that we are this subset of space and land on here. But as far as people go, it doesn't matter what kind of person you are, what that skin looks like, how many photons it reflects every second. It doesn't matter. But that's changing, and that's what's so hard about this whole thing. So hard. We had a 16-year-old kid die in our custody. They had him, he was on the floor, he had the flu, nobody noticed. They found him, hanging on a toilet. The vice president goes down there, and these guys he won't even look him in the eye. And they're like, no shower, I haven't showered. The American citizen they kept in there for over 3 weeks, they didn't let it bathe that time. These are, and creating these environments in this situation is an intentional process. It's an intentional thing. Because then they can use that as ammunition and use that suffering. That's what we're dealing with. Like I said, they're not responding to subpoenas, fighting the rule of law. President's friends with child rapists. The Epstein thing. So Acosta went down for it, sorry, Azar. Somebody who's watching might understand why I get those two confused quite a bit. As far as Trump's aides, Acosta and Azar. Can't even tell you right now without looking up which is the right one, because both of those names mean something else to me. Anyway, but yeah, so the Secretary of Labor had to step down. Now, I think, and one of the things that he mentioned, I guess, in the confirmation about this, and apparently some of the stories, again, a number of the people that Epstein did these horrible things with were prominent international figures. And I don't doubt for half a fucking second, that the cameras that were in there and the tapes of that have probably been used to some degree in international espionage. That's the kind of stuff that when you have that just horrific honeypot kind of thing, I don't know. That's wild speculation on my part, because I've read a couple stories about why this got this poo-poo thing, and I know that this stuff does happen. If you ever want to watch a movie that has a little bit about this, the Lord of War with Nick Cage has a good example of this kind of thing that I'm talking about. And I very much do believe this happens. This is so weird, too. It's not weird, but this whole, having this guy with these young girls and these prominent figures, this is what that whole fucking Q thing is about. Because the whole idea here was there were these prominent government figures protecting this person doing this. And this is who it was. And that was the deal that this whole thing was based on. Now, the fact that these people are all rampant Trump supporters and then Trump is tied up in it, well, whatever. That gets immediately ignored somehow. But that was the kernel of truth to that whole fucking ridiculous BS. It was sad to see Mueller and the testimony there. There were some good questions and some clear things. Unfortunately, stuff doesn't stick around for much, and there's nothing hot and juicy, and nothing really new came out of that. We know that there's impeachable offenses in there if people want to follow up on it. That obstruction of justice stuff is very clear. Yeah. That was tough. That's tough. Hopefully we'll see more come out of this eventually, because there are other investigations still ongoing. But yeah, it was tough to see him come and do that kind of two-step, well, you know, I'm not going to impunge the president by accusing him of a crime, and I can't say that he didn't commit a crime, so... And then Republicans are like, so he's cleared, huh? And it's like, no, I didn't say that. I specifically said not that. Oh, so he committed a crime, huh? Well, I didn't say that either. Oh, then he's cleared! Yeah, so that's, I mean, when the partisanship takes over instead of law, you're in a tough place. Yeah, so Moscow Mitch, sorry, the director of national intelligence, Dan Coates, stepped down. He quit because, again, and this was some other reports, that he was just sick of this. That this thing, we have these attacks ongoing from Russia trying to attack our democracy. We have a president who wants to be good friends with Putin. Then you have Moscow Mitch that came up now because Mitch McConnell, they've got a huge deal with an aluminum giant there in Kentucky, and he seems to be, he's sitting on all these election security bills in the Senate. They'll pass the House and they sit at the Senate as McConnell gloats about not taking them up. Dan Coates was the last quote-unquote adult in the room, if you'll remember, back when we were talking about this. He tried to replace him with this guy who was auditioning during the Mueller investigation, throwing these crazy rants at Mueller. Mueller's like, no, that's not true. No, that's not the case. No. But it was enough, and so the president gave him the nomination. He had to step down because, of course, when you don't vet people, you lose. That's pretty much all I've got tonight, guys. I had to get a lot of this out because, again, the point of the show, talking about it, was the president wants to do a international realignment. You're seeing that happening over and over again. Oh, I didn't even talk about Boris and Brexit, but anyway, Boris Johnson's the UK Prime Minister now. But this international realignment, you keep seeing these hints of it over and over again. And with the change in this totally confrontational role with China, with somebody who has no idea how to do this kind of stuff correctly, is disturbing. The stuff going on with North Korea, again, somewhat disconcerting. Same with Iran. See, none of these problems are being really addressed in rational ways. They're giving these short band-aid quick fixes, like trying to bluff them out or going to visit North Korea real quick, but they're not being solved. And just trying to bluff China doesn't work when China has people who are watching you and they know that you're bluffing, and then you brag on Twitter that you're bluffing, and they call your bluff. And that's where we are as a nation. I had to do this, and then we have this shooting. And where this man is explicitly targeting the same people that the president wants stopped from invading the country. They use the same language and the same targets. This is a new level. This is that heading downwards quickly. This is the bottom falling out kind of stuff. Because you saw in the attack in Ohio, someone who was connected via the internet and liked tweets connected to the shooting in El Paso. The shooting in El Paso is directly tied to the shooting in Christchurch. It was specifically targeted against a group that they didn't want there. And I could go on, and I will, but not tonight. The way we're going to win the election is with getting people motivated and getting them out to vote. It's not going to be necessarily changing Trumpers' minds. I do think they still need to own it, and they absolutely should be held accountable for all of this. But the way we're going to win is getting people out to vote. Because we still can do it that way, and that is the way it needs to be done. Peace out, y'all! I'll see you next month, or when I get a chance to do this. This was cathartic. It'll get better. We can get out of this. Definitely. Alright. Peace out. See y'all next week. Have a good day. Good night.